Good afternoon and thank you for joining today's webinar, Thinking Outside the Box, a guide to generating and increasing leads with webinars. My name is Gavin Hunt and I'm an employee of Redback Conferencing and your facilitator for today's session. Today's webinar will involve a PowerPoint presentation and some time for question and answers. If you wish to ask a question, simply type it in the message box which is located at the bottom right corner of your screen. If everyone now could actually send a message saying where you are and what the weather is like there, and if you could send it to everyone. See, people seem a bit scared out there. If you could please write where you are. Okay, we've got some coming through, a lot in Sydney. We will also be launching some polls throughout the webinar to get to know you a little better, so keep a lookout and we will let you know when to answer these. Your lines will be muted for the entirety of this presentation, so please feel free to use this method to communicate with the presenter throughout. You are free to take notes, however keep in mind that this session is being recorded and upon completion of the satisfaction survey you will receive an email within 48 hours containing a link to the recording. If you experience any issues in hearing the sound coming from your computer, please feel free to listen to the webinar through your telephone. To do this, simply dial the toll-free 1-800 provided in the message box and when prompted, enter the passcode provided. Today's webinar is presented by Kurt Jewson and Sara Gonzalez. Kurt and Sara are both employees of the Redback Conferencing with extensive experience in both lead generation and webinars. Together they are here today to inform and inspire you on the benefits of lead generation webinars and the best way to execute them. I would now like to pass the microphone on to Sara.
Thanks, Gavin, and thanks everyone for joining today. We can see that you're spread out right across Australia, so that's great. Welcome to today's session. I'd just like to start off by saying that webinars have become a bit of a buzzword over the past year or so, and as you can see, we're on one today, so they are quite common. And I personally think part of their popularity is the fact that time has become a bit of an enemy and that we're also time poor and we're all constantly looking for new and innovative ways to market. So today is really about giving you a snapshot into that and helping you find those ways. And I'd just like to start off by saying that during the registration process, you may remember we asked for what you wanted to really gain from today's webinar, and all the answers and responses were really pretty much along the same line. So overwhelmingly, people want to know more about new and innovative ways to source and market, and also tips and tricks on how to conduct these types of webinars. So we'll definitely go into that today. We'll also go into a bit of a marketing plan. We'll let you know some common mistakes and hopefully you can learn from those before you go into your first webinar, and also some top tips from our experience. So really, just before we start, just to let you know, it's really important that we focus on webinars and use them as part of an overall marketing plan. I think that's important to remember, and to really think about carefully executing them and planning them. So I think we're going to go into what's actually involved in a webinar now. So this is where I'll hand it over to Kurt so he can discuss.
Welcome everybody, and it is great to see Adrian there in Singapore as well, so we're going international with this one. I can see a number of our existing customers on here as well who I'm sure need no introduction to what is a webinar, but to those who do, we're talking about one or more speakers engaging with an audience online with audio, video and visual content, typically a slideshow. That audience, as we've seen today, can be worldwide, provided they have internet access. They can ask questions, respond to polls, which we'll come to shortly, download live content, and participate in other exercises, particularly if your webinar is something like a workshop. Speakers, typically subject matter experts, again, they can be located anywhere else in the world as well, which is fantastic for sourcing subject matter experts who aren't within Australia's shores. But it provides live and interactive access to people who typically wouldn't have that opportunity to see, hear and ask questions of such individuals. And they can range from very small groups right up to thousands of people and serve many purposes for those that hold them, including, like we're talking about today, marketing and lead gen. So with this in mind, we're going to find out a little bit about our audience here, and Gavin's going to launch our first poll for the afternoon, and that is, do you currently run webinars? Hand off to Gavin. Here we go, Gavin. Okay, our first poll today is, have you hosted a webinar before? That's A for yes and B for no. I can see the answers coming through quite fast now.
I wonder if you know what my answer will be.
I'm hoping. Okay, we've got almost all the answers. Okay, let me have our results there.
Wow.
Okay, all right. Well, that's a little unexpected. So 23% we can see have and 59 haven't. Now the next one's for those 23%. So the next poll we want to ask is, of those 23%, how many webinars have you held? So what is the level of experience? I'm going to answer this poll myself as well. Okay, and that's A, 0, B, 1 to 2, C, 3 to 5, or D, over 5. That if yes, how many have you hosted?
And if you have any other notes on maybe your experience with hosting a webinar or something similar, feel free to type this in the messages box as well.
Yeah, along with other questions as well. If we have questions, we're happy to stop the questions as we move through the presentation. Okay, then we've got the results there for you. How many of you have hosted webinars? Yeah, okay. Bit of a spread. And then back to a response for all here. We want to understand a little bit and share with each other how you're currently generating leads. So the next poll we're going to launch from Gavin, I might just close mine down there, is currently how are the majority of your leads generated? That's A, website, B, email marketing, C, referrals, D, events and trade shows, and E, advertising.
And really think about the majority of them here. If you do use some other channels to currently market, feel free to type that in the messages box and we can also see these pop up as well.
And it looks like people are giving this one a lot of hard thinking. Okay, we're starting to get some answers through now. Okay, I'm just going to close that poll and just share the results for you.
Wow, so Christy's also said that Google AdWords, cold calling, telemarketing as well, but we seem to see referrals quite high, which is great.
Yeah, and also we're limited to 5 selection there, so we see a lot of telemarketing, cold calling, AdWords. We couldn't fit it all there, or all of the above either. In-store visits, there we go. Okay, well, it's diverse.
Great.
All right, well, let's keep moving.
Great. So just to start, I just want you to think about the poll that we just conducted and then also think about Kurt's definition of a webinar. So a webinar pretty much covers all of these different marketing channels. So start off by thinking about your webinar, your website, sorry. It's a great channel to market through. It's online, it's available, and it has global reach. So I'm guessing your website probably has some educational content and hopefully, pardon me, it'll explain what you do. The reason why people are going to your website is to establish credibility and really purchasing criteria. So a webinar does exactly this, except one of the benefits is that you can really decide on what people are actually watching and what you're actually showing people. If you look at events and trade shows, another popular way to market, and these are live events where everyone gets into one place at one time. And a webinar does exactly this, except you've got the benefits, as you can see there, no parking, people don't have to fly into state, people can sit at their desks, and people can really wear whatever they like, and they don't really have to get dressed up, which is a bonus for someone like myself. And if we think about referrals, and the majority of you said that you actually use referrals as a great source of leads, and this is great to hear because they are the best types of leads, and I'm sure Kurt will actually agree with me on that. And the main reason is because they are pre-qualified, and this is exactly what a webinar does. It pre-qualifies your leads, and Kurt will talk more about the pre-qualification of webinars as we go through the presentation. And advertising, so paid advertising, it's quite a traditional method. It works well for some. However, as you probably know, it can be quite expensive, and I personally think it can be quite blatant. So I think people are starting to wake up to paid advertising, and it's good to get a little bit more creative and do different things, such as webinars. It's great because it is tailored, and you can choose who you're actually targeting, and that's another thing that a webinar does. And just on email marketing as well, I'm pretty sure everyone out there is familiar with email marketing. Your inboxes probably get flooded every day. And it's actually quite funny. I've been part of a discussion on LinkedIn at the moment for the past month, and the question is e-marketing dead? As you can imagine, people are quite passionate about their responses, with the majority saying, no way, as long as you get it right. And I personally am a big fan, but really if it's used in conjunction with other methods. So webinars are a little bit more interactive than email marketing, but as you can see, this demonstration, this diagram here is to just show you all exactly the benefits of a webinar. And I think we'll go into the benefits now, but Kurt, did you have anything to add on these sort of channels here?
Only that I think webinars are complementary to all of these. We see a lot of passive marketing of webinar invitations through advertising on a website. When we've attended trade shows in the past, we've run a webinar beforehand, and we've also spent a lot of time in these trade shows talking to people about our webinar programs and getting people to register. And then email marketing, and that's how we advertise our webinars personally. So there's a lot of complementary activities that go on here between these various approaches. Okay, so this is me here, generating qualified leads. And I want to make a few points initially to frame the rest of the discussion. And number one is not all prospects you encounter are purchase ready. I think we can all agree on that. And we need a mechanism to nurture longer lead time prospects. Prospects also take their sweet time in buying and almost always have a choice between you and several of your competitors. Now they want to make informed decisions, and so they'll research, consult widely, perhaps research some more and consult widely some more for that relevant information to make an informed decision. And then, so a business then needs to continually differentiate itself from its competition, and a great way for companies to do this is to provide a steady flow of high-quality, educational, relevant, timely information via webinar to position itself until a purchase is made. So how do we ensure that our leads that come through webinar channels are qualified? In a webinar, there's several opportunities to do this. So I'll always push for lots of text chat. If you look through the text chat, you're often able to understand where people are in their buying cycle and how interested they are in particular products and services. You can also use polling, as we just have. So questions through polling in order to qualify the people that are partaking in your webinar. And then why not ask participants in the exit surveys? Would they like a sales-orientated follow-up call? And other questions, are they currently evaluating these products and services? What is their role in the business? What is their role in the purchasing decision? Things like how large is the organisation, or any other qualifying questions that's relevant to your buying cycle. And of course, not everybody's going to respond to that line of questioning, but that's fine because not everybody is necessarily ready to engage or buy at that point in time either. And it's better that your sales team are able to qualify that. They're able to then spend their time on the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, speaking with participants that have a genuine interest. And there's a second part to the slide here, and that's around the benefits, extending the reach. So pretty simply, you can reach out to prospective clients very softly, I might add, very low pressure, wherever they are without expensive business travel and expensive time away from the office as well. Yet still, we think engaging them in a rich and meaningful communication that's both live and interactive. So if I could summarise the slide just before we move on, I would say that webinars provide an exceptional tool to reach out, identify, qualify, and nurture leads that can be anywhere in the country or the world if that's the capability of your business. And with that, okay, we're on to the next one. Over to Sarah.
Great. So on to the lower end of cost, which is probably a topic that all of you want to actually hear about, I'd imagine. So as some of you may know, marketing budgets can tend to get a little bit out of control. The great thing about webinars is that the message can be delivered to anywhere in the world while decreasing the travel and advertising and other direct marketing costs. So in short, they do save time and they do save money. So just think about holding live events. You've got room hire. You've got, if it's in a hotel, it can be quite expensive. You've also got catering, possibly. And then you've got the fact that people have to travel there. And while your budget may be okay to sustain that, you have to think about the people who are actually attending? Do they have to get some sort of approval to attend because of the cost? Do they have to stay in a hotel overnight if they want to attend? And how is that going to get approved? Maybe their budgets aren't as high as what you may expect. So in short, I'm not really suggesting that webinars replace, these lead generation webinars replace your face-to-face events, but really complement it. And I think, like Kurt said earlier, maybe if you do have a trade show or event coming up, maybe do a webinar beforehand to entice people to attend and to show them the benefits of why they should attend. So that's really on the cost side of things there. If we look at the improvement of responses, so it's important to note that while webinars are very cost-effective and they're a great alternative, we do have to make sure they're engaging. So if your webinar is engaging and interactive, I can almost guarantee that it will increase the success of your lead generation efforts. So just think about the fact that once your brand is out there, it's out there. So every time you call one of your prospects after the webinar or they hear from you, they're going to think back to your webinar. So if it's been really good, they're going to obviously respond really good. And I think the one point to make is that first impressions count, and you really only get one shot at it. And I think Kurt's going to talk more about this, but the fact that not selling on a webinar, we really can't stress that enough. It's very important that you're on there and you're creating value-based presentations as opposed to selling your service and selling your brand. People know why they're on the webinar, so you don't really need to throw it in their face every second. Just be quite conscious of the fact that you don't want someone actually on there doing a sales demonstration.
Yeah, and if I could add to that also, I think there's a natural filtering mechanism that takes place, provided you're selecting the right topics, you are selecting content that's related to the services you offer. People that attend are going to have at least a moderate interest. Again, it might not be a buy now, it might be a where these services are of interest, but it's 12 months out. Which brings us on to the next point here around increased conversion, and that's if your aim is for hot prospects, then provide topics that are relevant to your products and services. No point in offering a webinar on how to grow roses if you're an IT integrator, for instance. And then for the conversion, now we're talking about following up immediately. So your prospects are busy people just like you and I, no different, and no matter how inspired they are by the content of your webinar, as a few days pass, it's quickly being buried beneath other concerns and activities and things to do on their to-do lists. So with this in mind, have your sales team or the person responsible for following up with the participants on your webinars book out or block out sufficient time no later than the day after, and have them well briefed or aligned to what the marketing effort was. It's really important that the sales team continue through with this thought leadership, this consultative approach, if you like. Approach the call as a subject matter expert as well. If you could imagine the situation where you've participated in a highly informative and really educational webinar that you've found to be very valuable, only to receive a sales call from a sales representative only interested in a sales the next week. There's a disconnect there. And if you contrast that with a person who would call, solicit feedback on the topic, on the content, on the presenters, continue to develop that company's brand as that of an industry leader and that of a thought leader in their field, or perhaps someone who can offer information and approaches each customer's requirements with thought and attention. Overall, though, I guess we want to find the pain and schedule a meeting quickly the day after the webinar. How to measure is the second part of this slide. How to measure conversion is also important. Now, from a sales perspective, if you have a 12-month lead time, does it mean that it's going to be 12 months before you can measure the success of your webinar? So no, it's not, and there are other metrics, both from a sales and marketing side here, perhaps they're quite different, to measure the success of your webinar very quickly. From my perspective on the sales side, it would be how many attendees accepted calls or meetings to discuss their requirements in more detail following attending a webinar, or perhaps how many, or following on from that, how many of those meetings converted into proposals. They are very quantifiable and easily measured metrics following holding a webinar. And I know there's a few marketing metrics and things to measure as well, so I might hand back to Sarah here.
Yeah. I really like this feature of a webinar, and I get quite excited about it. It may seem a little bit sad, but I do. You can measure absolutely everything. So the first part of the measuring that I recommend is really the attendance side of things. So the webinar provider that you go with should actually offer reports that actually capture all this. So who registered for your event, who attended, and how long they stayed online for. It's not like you're being Big Brother or anything. You're really just using this information to help yourself for future webinars and then to also help the sales team. So think of the power. Just say, for example, you have a webinar that goes for 60 minutes and there's 100 people who register. After the webinar, you find out that about 20 of those people only actually stayed online for 10 minutes and then they dropped off. Obviously, you're going to approach these people a little bit different as opposed to those who stayed online for the whole 60 minutes and provided you with excellent feedback and who also got really interactive throughout. So just think about that. Following on from that, you should have the ability to redirect people to a page, and I really encourage you to use this sort of feature as opposed to waiting until the next day and then sending out a feedback form or something. The main reason is because it's at the front of people's mind, and people are actually going to get off the webinar, they're going to give you really honest feedback straight away. So an exit page is also a great thing to make sure that you have. And also the polling side of things. So we did launch polls earlier. You can actually capture all this information and put it into reports. Even the messages box, everything that's typed in through the messages box, you can also use that, can't you, Kurt?
Yes, and clever selection of the questions that you ask through the polls also plays into measurable how many people that attended responded yes to a particular poll or no to a particular poll, depending on what it is, and you're able to then measure, okay, well, how many people currently use webinars for lead gen, for instance.
And I think it's really important that while you do capture this information and you do use it to help yourself, whether it's marketing other webinars or formatting the content of other webinars, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with the sales team and let them know, because the more power and ammunition that they have when they do their follow-up calls, the better.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, questions. So if anyone has any questions or comments on anything that we've just spoken about, feel free to type them in the messages box and we can answer them for you.
Okay, the first question we have comes from Adrian Soon, and that, does the webinar tools do the measurement, time and log out?
I'll leave that one to you, Kurt.
Yes, absolutely. So different webinar technology will give you different reporting. What you've logged into today, yes, we generate a report for all of the polls. We have a transcript for all of the questions, and we also have a attendance report which tells us who logged in, what time they logged in, and what time they logged out. Things like were their webcams on, and there's other information there as well. But I think the answer to your question is yes.
Okay, we did have a question earlier from Tom Hadley, and that was, what about audio-video interaction and bandwidth?
Okay, audio-video interaction. So the performance of your video and also the audio to a limited extent is, or to some extent, is dependent on your location. So if you're in an area that has intermittent dropouts or bad internet connectivity, then that's what you're going to experience in the same way that you'd experience this browsing other internet sites. But with a webinar, we are dealing with a live technology. So when it drops, it will drop out. So to overcome situations like this, and if you've been following the messages as I have there on the right-hand side, you'll see that certain people are having a bad audio experience. So in response to that, offer a teleconference dial-in line where people can listen. And I've seen a few people that have dialed in on the telephone and said that's fine.
Okay, do we have any more questions out there? If you do, just type them in the message box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen.
Great. So now we get on to the planning side of things, and there's some great information, useful information, I guess, that you can use in here. Just so you all know, as you know, the webinar is being recorded, and within 48 hours we send an email to you containing the recording. We've also got a Word document, which is a planning guide that you can use. So you can sit here and write down what we're saying, but just keep in mind we'll be sending that out to you. So a good plan, they say, is better than a perfect plan tomorrow, and I definitely agree with that. And I think the reason why there's so many different sayings and quotes about planning is because it's all true, and it's really underrated, planning. The easiest way to understand the process of a webinar in the planning stages is to break it up into 3 sections, and that's before, during and after. So it does sound really simple, but once you get this into your mind, it's almost like a light bulb going off in your head, and it suddenly all starts to make sense. So I'll just go through quickly the before stage in a webinar. So in terms of the webinar details, what you're really trying to do at this stage is to confirm the details and the whole strategy. So think of the basics. So the topic, for example, it should capture attention immediately, but it should also relate to your target audience. Think about the relevance of it. Keep it topical and also keep it timely. So the date, for example, are there school holidays approaching, or is there a public holiday around that time that may cannibalise your attendance? And then also the time. Are there people in different time zones? Maybe people don't want to attend a webinar at 8 o'clock at night. Think about that sort of stuff before you actually go into it.
Yeah, I would say think about ensuring that it appears, or that it is, unbiased and independent in terms of the content that it delivers. It's not a sales pitch. It's very much an educational endeavour or experience for those people who attend.
Yeah, and Adrian just said that Singapore is a public holiday today, so that tells me 2 things. I didn't do my research properly, and you're quite keen, so thank you for joining. The presenter. So it's really important to get this right. Just remember that presenting online is completely different to presenting in person. So with the presenter, they have to be credible, they have to be reliable, but they also have to be pretty good. Think about drafting up some guidelines or something for them before they present. In the invitations and stuff like that, put a bio in there so people can see who they are and what they've done. And then what are they going to offer? Are they going to give someone a white paper or something that they can take away from the webinar? Everyone likes getting things for free, especially me, so it's a good idea to actually put something like that into it as well.
We have a question here around the best time for the webinar. And I think you'd have to look at your intended audience. So we do most of our webinars, don't we, Sarah, around the lunchtime, the lunch and learn style. However, we also have a number of customers who know that their audience just aren't available during the day, and they'll run webinars 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening. So I would say take a look at your intended target market and see when would be the best time for them.
What we've actually done as well in the past, and it works quite well, Nick, is we've actually, in an exit survey or in the registration process, asked people what time of day suits you best for a webinar. And of course, you can imagine you get so many different responses, but it gives you a bit of an idea that you can actually work with. So just a little tip there. Information capture, and this is really important and also a bit underrated, I think. So what do you want to capture from people who actually are attending or even registering? I think you should keep it simple, but I think there should also be a bare minimum. So include the fields that you're actually going to do something with. I know myself, if I register for something and it's a 2-step process, or maybe it takes more than 30 seconds, I lose interest straight away because I'm a little bit impatient. So think about what you actually want to do with these fields as well. And make them easy, and think about future events, and you can actually come up with some really good ones. So a little tip, for example, if you're asking people their industry, use maybe a drop-down field so you can actually then have some consistency with it. So I think you've got something to add on that, Kurt. You were talking earlier about the consistency.
Yeah, well, when we're talking about capturing information from a sales perspective here, there's things that we'd really like to know. And there are qualifying questions. But there needs to be a happy medium, doesn't there, between asking too many questions and losing people's interest, or feeling like it's having to provide too much information to attend the webinar, but capturing that information that you need.
And for marketers out there, it's a great time to actually capture how you market the webinar. So asking people how they found out about it. If you find that maybe 100 people registered and 2 people found out through social media, maybe you have to reevaluate your marketing efforts next time. That's also a little tip there. Webinar goals. So quite simply, what do you want to achieve, Obviously you want to generate leads, but what are your other goals? Do you want to have reoccurring attendees and build some sort of a community? What do you want your conversion rate to be? Just be careful and be realistic about this, and then start thinking about the feedback that you capture from that webinar and what you're going to do with that as well. And if we look here onto the summary and the abstract, so give people a bit of a teaser, and the whole aim is to inform and educate and inspire them throughout. Keep in mind that you want people to attend the webinar. That's the whole goal, so you don't actually want to divulge everything through the invitation. And I usually say to myself, you know, if you want people to attend the webinar, keep it relevant to what would you register for? What's something that's timely at the moment? And I like breaking things up into dot points, for example, because it's just a lot easier to read. People don't really want to sit there and read a whole page of information. And the marketing of the webinar. So like I said earlier, this really comes down to the timing and the audience. You don't really want to advertise too early, but you don't want to leave it to the last minute. So if you're email marketing, I suggest probably a week before the webinar to create some sense of urgency. You may have it on your website maybe a month beforehand because that's a little bit less aggressive. But I know myself, I have no idea what's happening in my calendar 3 weeks from today, and chances are if I register for your webinar in 3 weeks' time and something better comes up, no offence, I've got no obligation to attend, so I'm just going to take on the other thing because I haven't paid for this, and it's, you know, something else has come up, I might as well just attend that. Segmenting your audience, it's also a great one. A blanket approach may not also work. And then maybe joining, you know, social media is great for webinars because it spreads so quickly and it's online and it's relevant to what you're doing. Partnerships as well, it's a win-win situation. So just think about the marketing side of things, and in the planning document there's there's an extensive section on that as well. So I think there's a few questions coming through regarding this.
Okay, we've had a question from Adrian Soon. His question was, any idea what is the most ideal time allocation on the presentation, survey, poll and questions?
Oh, I think for a presentation people tend to get a little bit restless after 60 minutes. I'd probably keep it to maybe 45 to an hour. Make sure you tell people and you give them some expectation on how long it's going to go for though. Otherwise people will just get, you know, if it's 1 minute past the allocated time, they'll get a little bit itchy. What are your thoughts on that, Kurt?
Yeah, I would say poll early and poll often and keep people engaged. I'll just add on to this here, the questions, ask questions throughout and have your facilitator comfortable in interrupting and stopping for those questions as they arise. And then also you've noticed that we share the messaging facility. So that creates a nice level of interaction as well, where rather than submitting your question and it's lost into the ether and nobody else can see it, we keep it open so people are able to see each other's questions, respond to each other's questions if they require. So interact early and interact often.
Okay, how often are webinars used in conjunction with live audience presentations? That was from Nick Schauler.
Yeah, right. I responded to that while Sarah was presenting there. So I think what you're referring to there is a webcast. And this is very similar to a webinar, although it involves a physical audience with a video camera as opposed to a webcam capturing the presenter at the front of the room. And increasingly often is the answer to the question. I sent a link there, and that's a link through to a presentation that was given with the City of Sydney. And you can register and view that if you click on the link, hopefully once this webinar completes. But yes, increasingly often.
Okay, and Tom Hadley had a question. Can it be recorded, including audio-video interaction?
Correct, yes. It's all recorded. Everything's recorded. And I think as a registrant, as a participant, Sarah, people will be sent a link to access the recording?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. So it's always recorded, and then it's available on demand afterwards, which then allows you to start to think about things like multi-purposing your content. Are you able to use the recordings in blogs? Are you able to use it via your social media pages? Can you create a library of information that builds up on your website? Again, we're trying to think about how we can position our business as thought leaders, as people that are a great source of information, content, and ultimately advice.
Okay, Tom had one more question. Is there whiteboard and application sharing?
Yes, there is. Yeah, we're just sharing a PowerPoint right now, although we could be sharing a whiteboard, and we could be sharing live from the desktop.
Great.
I see one more question here, and that's from Tom around Redback support 24/7. So we're not Tom, unfortunately. We're based Sydney, and we support our market includes some of Southeast Asia, but it's mostly Australia and New Zealand. Okay, so we're onto a new slide here, and what we're looking at is response rates to number of people who register versus number of people who attend. So don't be disheartened, I think, is the takeaway from this slide. Although marketing and lead generation webinars do typically receive a higher drop-off, we are looking for qualified leads. We are looking at interacting with people who are genuinely interested in the products and services that we deliver, or in the case of the webinar, the content and the education that we're providing. And you can see what we're competing against here, or some of the other bars on this slide here, things like internal training and employee communications. I mean, those are always going to attract a much higher percentage of registrations actually attending than someone who is providing a marketing or a lead generation webinar. We thought we'd just highlight that there is a large drop-off typically between registrations and attendees when it comes to lead generation and marketing.
I think it's very important to take that into consideration when planning your goals, and think about how many people you want to register versus attend, and think about that number there. Great, so we'll go into the fun part now, which is actually during the webinar and things that you can actually do. So I think the format's quite important, and you really need to have this settled before you actually go into the webinar. Are you going to break it up like we have through different question and answers, or maybe you'll just leave all the questions to the end? Are you going to have different intervals during your presentation, or are you going to actually keep it simple? Also think about the fact if there's more than one presenter, you want it to come across as quite organised. In terms of the interaction, which a few of you are asking about, so how will you keep your audience interacted and engaged? People do have quite a short attention span, especially as someone mentioned, if after people come back from lunch or something, they tend to get a little bit sleepy. Can't remember who that was, but especially when you can't see them, you can't actually gauge their feedback or anything. So you have to use these different tools to actually keep it interactive. And I'm just hoping no one's flicking through their emails now. So there are some great tools available. Like we said earlier, polls like we've used, the whiteboards, which hopefully if you see Kurt's question down the bottom, we can launch in a few minutes. And having that ability to actually have that feedback and then do something with it. Like I said earlier, if you have this information, don't keep it to yourself. Pass it on to your sales team so then they know who was engaged during the webinar, who just sat there and didn't really pay attention to it. Make sure you pass that information on. So have a backup plan. What happens to the webinar if you get no questions? What happens if you get too many questions? What we actually advise, and we do it ourselves, and we'll do it today, is if we get too many questions come through, then I think we're actually going to collate all those at the end through the transcript reporting system, and then actually answer them and send it on to you afterwards. And that's something that we quite commonly do, don't we, Kurt?
Yes.
Yes, big fan. Okay, so moving on to the technology side of things, and I'll get to Kurt to talk a little bit more about this because he's a little bit more tech savvy than I am.
Plan B, VoIP connection support. Yeah, that's right. If you are running a webinar for the first time, you might like to have the comfort that you have a webinar provider who's happy to take support calls. So help desk support. Things like a few of you have experienced issues with the audio today. Now that's it's not something that you can control as a presenter. It's a local issue. People aren't always going to have the most reliable internet connections. Now how you can counter that is by looking at things like dial-in teleconferencing, so people can listen over the phone. Other things to take into consideration are systems checks. Always have a rehearsal. Make sure you use the same equipment that you use during the webinar. There's things like antivirus softwares that can affect with the webinar. People who grab a new computer and go to log in and they don't have admin rights, and if the webinar software requires a plug-in or a download, then that's going to cause issues. So Plan B, you develop a Plan B through running several rehearsals, trialing again, rehearsing again. I think that's all I'll add there, but I can see, and I started this, who would like to have a go on the whiteboard?
We've had a couple of people come through.
Looks like the whiteboard's popular, so perhaps we can finish this slide,
Yep.
Launch a whiteboard, and in the meantime, Gavin could give participants the ability to draw, and if you could just hold off until we bring the whiteboard up, and then we'll perhaps ask a question for participants to answer.
Yeah, and this is really the last section, and this is the facilitation side of things. So we've got the lovely Gavin here today doing a great job with the facilitating side of things. So their main role is to introduce presenters, to interact with people throughout. So if someone is having technical issues or something, they're in the messages box. Really, the presenters should stick to presenting. They shouldn't really be there unless needed, of course. But we definitely recommend having a facilitator and having someone experienced and also engaging. So thanks once again, Gavin.
Oh, you're very welcome, very welcome. And just slowly, I'm giving everybody drawing rights, so you will be able to draw once the whiteboard comes up.
And I think just as we launched the whiteboard and as people are drawing on there to have a bit of fun, Adrian has asked that all webinars have a Plan B plan, and I know mine certainly do. And I think in terms of the technology, it's definitely important to have a Plan B in terms of people actually listening to the webinar. So like we said earlier, the telephone side of things. You know, it is technology at the end of the day, so depending on where you are, depending on what you're using, things can happen, so I definitely recommend a Plan B.
And as you can see, people are enjoying the whiteboard.
I had ideas of asking participants to describe their favourite prospect.
People get so excited, it's like the inner child comes out.
You'll see here, so I can erase all of these drawings. Oh, and here we go again. Typing is faster. There we go. So I can see here that, who is that? Adrian Soon has found the text chat, as has Helen.
Wow.
Oh,
Someone...
Nick Charlotte's taken over. Can I cut and paste onto a whiteboard? So Tom, no, you can't cut and paste onto a whiteboard, but what you are able to do is create a slide that has what you would be cut and pasting onto the whiteboard in the slide. So you might have a flow chart with empty boxes in the diagram, and people are able to fill that in using the text chat tool.
I don't know if people are going to want us to go back to the presentation now.
Okay.
We did have a question, though, from Jenny Lewis. If someone is Skyping, does that affect the audio?
In the same way that the Skype call, and I'm just going to erase everybody's drawings there, Skype can affect audio, but in the same way that Skype would affect audio if you phoned somebody's landline, mobile, or just on a Skype call, Skype uses the internet, which is inherently unreliable. It's the public domain. So, yes, it can. It's Skype. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so we're going to move on to after and feedback and how we're going to capture it and use it. And this is where Sarah's an expert in exit surveys, and you'll see this once we close down the webinar. You'll all be asked to answer an exit survey, which will be a model of how you should run your exit surveys when you run lead generation webinars.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with the feedback, like it says here, you need to use it. There's nothing worse than capturing feedback and just having it sit there. You know, afterwards maybe asking people what do they actually want to see more of in future webinars, or what are they interested in, and then actually capturing that information and offering things that are totally different is probably not the best thing to do. So I definitely recommend using feedback, but using it well.
If you have a CRM in place, you're able to take that feedback from the polling, from the transcript, from the exit survey, and load that into the CRM along with the name of the participant, the phone number, and all of the details from the registration page initially. Now that arms the sales team with valuable information, as opposed to this person attended a webinar, let's give them a call. You can see how they can really continue on with the theme of the webinar if they're armed with as much of the feedback as possible.
Great.
Natalie Barrett, yes, you can save the whiteboard interaction. Not only is the whole presentation captured, but you're able to capture anything on a slide or a whiteboard as you move through the presentation as well. Reports, we'll quickly go through this because this was a response to one of the questions earlier. Attendance, polling transcripts, all of it's captured, or it should be captured in a good webinar technology and made available easily via a download button via an Excel or a CSV file that you can then slice and dice and arrange in a way that best fits your requirements. Opt-in, grow your community. Absolutely. So if people are registering for your webinars, you want to make it very easy for them to opt in to future webinars or future email communications or communications of any type. And once you've got them online, in the exit survey, I think we have it in our exit survey, it's in a number of different places, there's, yes, an opt-in link for future webinar invitations.
It's a great idea to actually build your community in this database, especially if you are going to do more than one webinar and you plan on doing a series. And you'd be surprised by who knows who, and if you do the registration process right, you'll actually see that people start to forward your invites on, and that community gets bigger and bigger. And I just want to say that if it's a good webinar, people will want to know you and they'll want to keep coming back for more, and that goes to the same thing if it's a bad webinar. So just keep that in mind as well. And the follow-up, this is the most important part, I think.
Yeah, that's right. We talked about this earlier. The follow-up is important. It needs to be quick, no later than the day after. But I'm repeating what we covered earlier here, so I'll keep it quite short. But the sales team need to continue on in that vein of the webinar itself. So continue on with a consultative approach, soliciting feedback about the webinar itself, being that source of information, that thought leader, that industry leader that you're trying, that your marketing efforts are pushing towards. So very, very important that there isn't a disconnect between the webinar and the content or the experience offered and the sales follow-up and the experience offered.
And keeping in touch.
Yeah, future webinars and having a community. So that's right, running webinars on a regular basis, running webinars, invitations on your website, really trying to build that community among your customers and prospects. I think you can see where we keep messages open. It really helps to build that sense of a group within a webinar.
I think keeping in touch also caters to those people who may not have attended the webinar, or maybe they're not ready to buy right now, as Kurt mentioned. So while they may not want to buy right now, maybe in a webinar that you hold 6 months down the track, they will be ready to buy and they will have a need for your product or service. So definitely keep in touch with those people. Usually it's the ones that you think won't really buy, isn't it? And then all of a sudden they come back around after about 6 or 12 months. So definitely keep that in mind. Great. So we've got a few more questions coming through, Gary.
Okay, so from Tom Hadley, we've said, can a short video of, say, one of his job sites be shown?
Yes, absolutely. In the same way that we're sharing a PowerPoint presentation, it's uploaded to what we call a library. You're also able to upload a video file. Now, I don't think we have a video file in our library today, do we?
No.
No, we don't. But absolutely that's possible. So what you're doing is uploading a video. In our case, with this technology, it requires it to be in Flash format, and that can then be shared with your participants, paused, annotated over, played, paused again, just like you would in a live setting.
And we've got a question from Christy. She said, is the webinar prepared like a PowerPoint slide, and can you add pics, videos, and website links?
Yes, it is prepared. The PowerPoint is prepared. Sorry, I'm just going to look at that question again. Prepared by, yeah, it is a PowerPoint slideshow. So you're preparing a PowerPoint slideshow and then uploading that to the library. Now, links within the PowerPoint slide aren't active, and in response to that question earlier, I just posted a link through to a webcast page. In the same way, you could post links through to other web pages as well. And the other one was pics. Yeah, if you have a picture in your slideshow, it'll render and look like the picture in your PowerPoint presentation online as it did offline.
Okay, Leslie Ryle said, we find it useful to have the follow-up personnel on the webinar. Maybe that's a good idea.
Yes, absolutely, Leslie. How are you, Leslie, by the way? Hope you're well.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
Flash, did you say? Yes, Tom. Yes, Flash video. Flash video. So there's plenty of converters out there if you have it in a different format. We actually have one on our website that you can use. So upload your file in the format that it's in, and it will give it back to you as a Flash file.
Great. So we're going to go into 4 common mistakes now. So these really talk to everything that we've spoken about, but we think they're quite important and we think that we should actually reinforce it. And the first one that I really want to touch on is the not segmenting side of things in the marketing. So like I said before, a blanket approach doesn't always work no matter how you advertise. So start thinking strategically really about who you want to attend your webinar and then work backwards. I guarantee it will benefit you, and if you are looking into different options such as social media or something, maybe if you are doing a webinar on gardening, good luck with that. But yeah, if you are, and then you're doing maybe going on to LinkedIn and finding groups on there that actually groups about gardening, and start targeting those groups and start discussions and start targeting your webinar to those groups who will be actually interested in it. The surveying, which we've spoken a bit about, so these are the perfect, webinars are the perfect opportunity to see what people really think. So how are you going to know what people thought of your webinar if you don't really ask them? And you're not really going to get that feedback, especially in the early stages, which is quite important. And it's really important to note that once you survey people and you take that feedback on board, don't get too disheartened by it, because they do take a while to actually build up these webinars. So just keep going and use that feedback to constantly improve. And really think about the questions, and when you ask people for their feedback, I think it sort of generates some sort of relationship instantaneously. People actually think, oh wow, they really want to hear my feedback, and people are willing to give it to you if you actually ask. But once again, make sure you're willing to do something with it.
And also with surveying, don't miss the opportunity to identify ready-to-buy prospects. So ask those questions.
Great.
Selling, yeah, a common mistake. So people don't attend a webinar to be sold to. They attend the webinar for educational purposes. They want to find out more about a situation about a product, a service, a new way of doing things, a market development, whatever it might be. So avoid selling. Avoid selling at all costs. Of course, it's fine to plug your products and services in the last few minutes of the webinar and let people know if they are interested in expanding or discussing further. Then we're happy to talk. But just avoid selling throughout the body of the webinar itself. And the other one that I would say is a big mistake is no follow-through. And by follow-through we mean a sales-orientated call to those people who have expressed an interest in the technology. For all of marketing's efforts in putting these things together, it doesn't make sense for the sales team not to follow through and contact those attendees. And that's that. Now top tips.
Yeah, so the topic, like I said earlier, is quite important, and you need to get it right because you can't go back and change it. And if you do go back and change it, it does come across as a little bit unprofessional. So, like I said earlier, keep it relevant, keep it topical, and make sure you have a good presenter to actually do your topic justice. The registration process, so think of the fields carefully once again, and think about what you really want to get out of this process. And asking people open-ended questions is also a good idea to get their understanding. So like through this process, we asked you what you wanted to gain through this webinar. Obviously, we're going to take that feedback and then use it. And it's a great idea because it helps you format your presentation. And if you have that information beforehand, it really is priceless. The recording, and someone touched on this beforehand, the recording of the presentation.
The recording of the presentation, is that my cue, Sarah? Yeah, it needs to be recorded, right? For all the effort that you're going through to put together your webinar, not to record it's just a real shame. And as you run more webinars and you build this loyal community, which should be one of your aims and your objectives, then have a place where you list all of your recordings. And it might be that in terms of lead gen, this would be my preference, that in front of your recordings there's a registration page. So to access this recording, please fill in these details. And perhaps an option there afterwards to park or land somebody on a contact us form for more information with the recording. So the event then lives long after the live webinar and into an on-demand resource that can be a source of information to prospective customers, and also a draw card, if you like, to your website, attracting people to come and find out who you are and the information you provide.
And just on that, think of the power of Google. So if you've got a whole list of recordings or something on your website or on some other site, and if someone types in a topic that you're actually referring to on Google, chances are that if you've got enough content on there, your recording may even come up, and you could be actually putting it out there to an entirely new audience. So, you know, when you have the recording, like Kurt said, make sure you've got that registration process. Make sure you've got your brand and logo prominent on there, because you never know who could actually look at it.
Top tips: interaction and engagement. Critical. We need to keep people engaged. Whilst you're participating in the webinar, I'm sure a few of you could vouch for this, you're being interrupted by emails and phone calls and people in the background, and you've got all sorts of things going on in your office as well. So the poll initially, or so should I say poll quickly, get people's interaction, run a whiteboard, play videos, anything you can to encourage interaction and engagement, and ensure that it is a rich dialogue.
And the follow-up and the feedback, as we've touched on quite a fair bit. So make sure you do follow through with everyone, whether they're registrants or attendees or buyers or non-buyers, and get that feedback and use it. We can't really stress that enough. But otherwise, they're the top tips, and that's what we see working from our experience. I think that pretty much wraps it up.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so if anyone does have any other questions, we're more than happy to take a recording of the transcript and then answer them and get back to you within 48 hours. But personally, from myself and Kurt, thank you for joining. It's been great having you online. I'll now pass it on to Gavin to wrap it up, and feel free to contact us after the webinar should you have any further questions on anything that you like.
Thank you very much for your participation. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys.